Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical applications of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, executive and life coach Meredith Oke, with a quick reminder that podcasts are conversations, not consultations. But if you're looking for one of those, do check out our free practitioner directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. So, a lot of us, when we hear the word medical intuitive, we are tempted to close our minds, throw that term into the woo woo bucket, and move on to something that has more hard science behind it. I would invite you to keep your skepticism, but move forward into this topic anyway. I know for a lot of you, you're already there. You may already be practicing something like this. You're already deep down this rabbit hole. But for some of us, words like medical intuition are like, I don't know, sounds a little woo-woo. So if that's the case, I would invite you to do a couple of things. The first thing is to make sure that you listen to last week's episode with Carrie Bennett, where she breaks down the ether and really gives us some scientific explanation for the invisible forces at play that are all around us that we cannot recognize with our senses or even with our scientific instruments yet. The next thing I would have you do is to really come into this interview with my guest, Wendie Colter, with a nicely opened mind. Wendie is a medical intuitive. She also runs a program where she certifies health and wellness practitioners in medical intuition. She's had doctors go through her program. She's had many, many nurses go through her program, health coaches. Anybody with a health and wellness background is eligible to be trained in this field. And what she has done is really professionalized something that was on the fringe for many, many decades. Medical intuition is not new, but Wendie's approach is. And she has done studies and been published in an academic journal showing the deep effectiveness of this approach. And she herself has done a ton of work to make this field palatable to the medical community. And the results that she gets and what she's able to see with this approach is really incredible. She explains a lot of it in the interview. And I just want to give a brief glimpse into her bio so that we can understand the level that Wendie has approached this from. So she is the CEO of the Practical Path, the founder and CEO, which is the school that certifies medical intuitives. She also wrote a book on the topic, which won a very prestigious award. It's the Nautilus Silver Award in Mind, Body, Spirit Practices. It also won the International Book Award in Alternative Health Medicine. And Wendie serves on the Integrative Health Policy Consortium, the IHPC. She is on the Bioenergy and Health Committee. She is also the president of the National Organization for Medical Intuition. Associations are very important when you're trying to professionalize a field. That's why we have the QBC. And she is also a member of the Consciousness and Healing Practitioners Council. So Wendie is an extraordinary person who realized the value of a skill set, but also saw that what it needed in order to become accepted by a more mainstream medical establishment. So this is a continuation of our theme from last week with Carrie in the Ether, where we really are bridging that gap between hard science and what has been typically pushed out to the fringe and ignored. And because of people like Wendie, we're coming to a place where we can no longer ignore it. And because of the epidemic health crises going on in populations all over the world, we're coming to a place where we absolutely need it. So if you have any curiosity about medical intuition, how it works, what it does, what goes into it, you are going to absolutely enjoy this conversation. I loved chatting with Wendie, and I learned so much about this radical yet ancient approach. Enjoy. All right. Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, Wendie Colter. I'm so happy to have you here. As I was just saying, I heard an interview with you months ago, and I was deep into doing only light interviews, but now it's 2024. I'm branching out, so I'm so happy to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me, Meredith. It's a pleasure.
All right. So, Wendie is the author of the book Essentials of Medical Intuition: A Visionary Path to Wellness. So, Wendie, I'm pretty sure most of my audience is going to be way open to the idea of medical intuition. Um, but let's sort of start at the beginning and maybe start with a more skeptical person in mind. Could you explain what medical intuition is and in a general way how it complements other things?
All right, great. So, medical intuition, I like to start with what it isn't.
Okay,
Sometimes
perfect.
that's helpful. So, it's not a treatment, it's not a modality, it's not an intervention, the way energy healing might be an intervention or seeing your doctor and getting, whatever. Those are interventions. It's not that. What it is an energetic, intuitive assessment process to review, to assess, to evaluate the physical body and the biofield. And it's done using intuitive skill sets. And that's a whole other conversation we can get into. But the value of it, we found over the years, is that it can help, first of all, the client, or if working with a physician or a practitioner, the patient, help them understand what's going on in the physical body, in the physiology, and in the biofield, which is the auric field and the chakra system, the energy systems of the body, to find out the root causes of illness, imbalance, and disease. And we're looking at it not just from the lens that typical medical profession does, which is just the physiology, just the body. We're looking at it to see what the emotional, mental, and spiritual causes might be as well. That information in my practice goes to the client, and that client can take that to their healthcare providers. And lots and lots of case studies I can go into about all of this, but that's the gist of it.
Okay. I love this. And it's so interesting because what I'm hearing you say is that it's not so it's not a modality in the way like I might go and get sound healing done or have a chiropractic adjustment. This is more like getting your labs done on an energetic level.
That's such a great way to say. No one's ever said that to me before. I love it. It's kind of like that. Yeah, it goes deeper than just that, though. But that is something that medical intuitives can do. Obviously, it doesn't take the place or replace any kind of testing or treatment or medical care or medical advice. It's not that at all. It's
Right.
information. And
Yes.
medical intuitives do not and should not diagnose unless they're licensed to do so. We don't prescribe, we don't do any of that. It is information for the client or patient, or the healthcare provider for working directly with one. That information is meant to inform and illuminate rather than directly affect anything. And let me give you the
Right.
principle here. The,
Okay.
the principle, the underlying principle is that the physical body and the biofield holds or stores information, not only physical information, which you'd expect the body to do, but also this whole story, you could say, of the origins of an imbalance and the imbalance itself. It stores this information for decades. And there's a lot of actual research around this when you look into what's called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. There's tons of research on this. The CDC's done research, um, and it's fascinating research. And the idea there is the same premise, which is early life trauma or early life, experiences can show up later in life as imbalances in health, physical and emotional and mental health. We also see this in the work of psychoneuroimmunology, where they talk about how our emotions affect our ability to heal, or and all of that. And we also see it in epigenetics, another new-ish field that talks about trauma that's passed down through generations. So what medical intuitives have been doing kind of, naturally for centuries is now, frankly, being studied by science and validated in terms of what we have been able to bring forward. So there's this really fun and fascinating time we're in where these spiritual, so to speak, practices are starting to get corroborated through science, which is very exciting.
It really is. And it's in the world that like our little community here where we look at the science of quantum biology, it absolutely validates every single thing. And that's why I wanted to have you on because we're starting to be able to explain the mechanisms of so many of these things, like the structured water that fills our body as a liquid crystal that stores memory, and the
Yeah.
biofield and the ether, which stores memory. So it then the next step in having someone who's able to read those memories
Yeah.
seems so clear and like such a good idea. And
I agree.
yeah, and
It's,
I love that you have um, created a certification and a way to train people to be able to do this because
yeah.
it does take the woo out of it. And that's I have many questions, but one I do want to ask because I see this comes up a lot is sometimes people do get to a point where they're like, okay, I do, all of the traditional ways of trying to figure out what's going on with myself or my child are not working. Like I want to get that, I want to go to that person who sees things that other people don't see.
Yeah.
And there's usually some kind of a little bit of confusion like should I go to a psychic, should I go to a shaman, and so explain how a medical intuitive is different from those things and why if it's a health related reason it makes sense to do medical intuition.
Well, you're asking a really important question, and I'll answer it in a way that's real for the field right now. There is no one way to practice medical intuition at this point.
Right.
We're working on, and I'll talk about this later if you want. But I'm the president of a newly formed national organization for medical intuition, and we're not here to tell people how to practice, but we are here to talk about ethics and
Hmm.
standards of practice. So I'll get into that
Right.
later if you'd like to talk about it. So the reason I'm saying that is because the people that are joining the organization have a myriad ways to do their work. But the definition that the National Organization for Medical Intuition, and I'll shorten it by saying we call ourselves NOMI.
Okay.
NOMI's definition is that if you're going to call yourself a medical intuitive, you had better know how to read the physiology and anatomy of the body, because that is what the word in medical implies, that you
Right.
can visually or intuitively or emotionally or however you use your intuitive senses understand the workings and be able to explain to your client or patient or whatever what's going on in that realm, not just the biofield, not only the biofield, I should say. And that was the distinction that we've made. So that may be
Okay.
the distinction that you're asking about.
Yeah.
And typically, if you look into historical records and certainly contemporary records of what the definition of medical intuition is, you don't need to look any further than Carolyn Mace and Edgar Casey, both of whom did that, right? And they're kind of
Right.
in modern times, in contemporary times, we think of those two folks as sort of the originators. They're not, it goes way back. But shamanism, I can't speak to because I don't know enough about it. And the other one you asked about was
A psychic.
a psychic. Well, the funny thing about the word psychic and shamanism is that it's all about intuition
Yes.
and intuitive practices, however you learn them, all of which are wonderful and all of which are valid and should be validated. Medical intuition, the way I practice it and teach it, is a very specific method that I've
Mhm.
developed over the years. It has to do with looking, I use the visual sense of intuition, which is clairvoyance, which means clear seeing.
Mhm.
When I lecture and talk at medical integrative healthcare conferences. If you say the word clairvoyance, you'll clear a room of doctors faster than snapping your fingers. They don't want to hear that word,
I was gonna say,
right?
how does
But
that go over?
not well. I can't talk about it that way. But when you talk about it and you say, look, use your mind's eye, and
Mhm.
I use an intuitive practice that involves your mind's eye, they go, oh, okay.
Right.
It's like, that's not so strange. So, there's ways to talk about it. But that practice for me, and the only correlation I have for it in the world that makes sense to them or to people, is it looks like a real time or a real life MRI, which isn't true. MRIs are in black and white. I see in color and, full everything. And
Right.
MRIs can be kind of shadowy in certain places. I see the detail, and we can see down to the cellular level. Someone asked me if we could see
Mm.
to the subatomic level, and I said, well, why not? I know medical
Ah.
intuitives that are working in scientific circles that are doing that. So the practice of, it's funny, the word psychic is another stigmatized word, um, but it means something similar. It means that you're using what I call the meta senses, meaning beyond, meta beyond our typical five senses.
Mhm.
Everybody has them, everybody can use them, but whether or not you want to train yourself in a
Mhm.
specific format, in medical intuition, for example, I train in the visual site because I want to see what's going on in the body. I literally
Right.
want to see it. I don't want to, feel it, for example. Uh,
Right.
that takes practice. It takes a good teacher. It takes an ethical practice. It takes a lot of things that are still forming in this field,
Mhm.
of energy work of all kinds. That was the long
Right.
answer.
No, I love it. And it's very clarifying because I know a lot of times people come to that moment where they're ready for this
Yeah,
level of help, but they're just not exactly sure what to call it or how to access it.
yeah.
That's just really interesting. And I love being able to see into the subatomic. I know that some people who've studied with us are going to hear you and just want to come and learn your you learn your how to do this with you, and
Wonderful.
they're gonna go there. It's gonna be so fun. I can't wait to hear these future
Yeah.
experiences. Okay, so I wanted to circle back to a couple other things you talked about. So we talked about how the medical intuition is about getting information from deeper levels and other places
Mhm.
that you can't get in a from a normal lab or normal MRI. So
Mhm.
what does that information look like? So like if I had a session, what do you hand over to me after?
So there's several ways that I look at it and that my students and graduates work.
Hmm.
First thing I'm going to do is look at the physical body. I want to ask, it is ultimately a dialogue between my
Okay.
intuitive sense and the body's consciousness, and bodies have their own consciousness. That's if you look at the work of Bruce Lipton and others, you'll see
Hmm.
that great stuff. And that's how I experienced it too. The cells have their own perspectives, the organs, the systems. And so I
Mm,
want to know what's going on there, where things out of balance and how it can be balanced. That's the first thing, because that's what people come to a medical intuitive for, is like, what's going on for me, physically, what's going on for my health. And so that's where I'll start. And I'll do
okay.
a broad and overview scan, and I'll do a deeper scan, and I'll get information from my client about that. And that's the first step. And that takes probably half the session, and that's or more. And that's really the crux of medical intuition. Now I want to find out why it's there. What's going on? What caused it?
Right.
Because when you think about it from the energetic perspective or the quantum even perspective, something
Hmm.
starts somewhere and then is manifested. And
Yeah.
the way the body works, how I've seen over the years, is the physical manifestation is the nth degree, so to speak. It's like it gets to a point and then it manifests. And so I want to follow that trail backwards to see where this began. And I'm looking at it physically. Where did
Hmm.
this begin physically? Where
Yeah.
did it begin emotionally, mentally? Where did it begin in the life history? What does the energy from the spiritual perspective want the my client to know about it? Now, what does their guidance say about this? What are the life lessons for them in all of this? This is where you get this kind of, you can hear it's kind of this broad spectrum that's incredibly specific to you, but it
Yes.
has to do with everything, not just, give me a pill to cure my ill.
Yes.
That's the old-fashioned way. We're hoping eventually. It's not enough. Because I'll tell you
Yeah.
why. Because people don't heal, right?
Yeah.
People don't
Right.
sometimes heal. And when they don't, how fascinating is it to find out why,
Yes.
right? And that's a lot of the people who come to medical intuitives in general are folks who haven't had a lot of success with conventional medicine.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people like that who just feel that they've been almost abandoned by conventional medicine because what the doctors will do is they'll say, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for you, which is a terrible thing. And no doctor wants to do that. I want everybody to hear this. I've spoken with a lot of doctors and I train doctors. They don't want to say that to anyone, but
Yeah.
sometimes they have to.
Yeah.
So I've gotten so many referrals, and so do many medical intuitives from doctors who just say, I don't know what's going on. Can you look? And the anecdotal stories that we have, and hopefully we're going to be gathering these in more research, are just phenomenal, where the medical intuitive sees where the origin, the problems, or the imbalances are, and can relate that to the doctor, and the patient can have relief. They can find a way forward. That's the whole point.
Right. And it's almost like it opens a door as
Yeah.
opposed to being like standing at a brick wall.
Yeah.
Like there's no, like
Yeah.
I've tried everything and there's no way forward. Now you're opening up all these new portals to explore. And so
Plus,
there's a
yeah.
path forward, like, oh, I could go this way, I could do
Yeah.
this.
That's exactly right. And what's really fun about medical intuition as a medical intuitive is I learn every reading I do, every session I do, I learn more because I'm tapped into, you could call it the quantum field. That's
Yeah.
how I do my work. And so that means, what is that? Well, you could call that like everything and anything, right? It,
Yeah.
it, it holds everything and anything. Therefore, I learn things that I would have no knowledge of. One of my
Right.
favorite stories in the book, if you don't mind me
Please tell
relating
it.
that,
Yeah, I was going to ask for some
was
case studies.
yeah. So the book is full of case studies because I feel like there's not enough out there.
Yeah.
And one that's springing to mind here was this wonderful gentleman who had just had some kind of emergency intestinal surgery, and his doctor was recommending, and he had developed a hernia, and his doctor was recommending a surgery with mesh and all this stuff. And he was really worried about that because there's a lot of rejection of mesh. There's a lot of lawsuits over that. And he called me to see what I could see. And I won't go through the whole session, but what was really fun about this one was um, the his now I work with people's guidance, and it's again it's this connection to quantum field. And what I saw was that there was all of this was some years ago. There was all of this research going on outside of the US on how to take a piece of mesh, coat it with the patient's stem cells, and insert it, and the body doesn't reject it, right? Because that's
Right.
the issue with mesh is the body
Right.
rejects it, and then there's all these
So the
problems.
mesh is something that the surgeon puts inside.
Yes, it's like a surgical procedure to tame or contain the hernia, but
Okay.
but so I'm looking at this going, okay, I just got to tell you, there's this research going on in China and this other place, and you might be able to find this online. And I said it's where you coat the stem cells and the body doesn't reject it, and it could be safer, and you might want to talk to your doctor about that. And he's like, I've never heard of that. Well, I got off the call and immediately I'm on Google, which happens all the time. And I found it and I sent him the research. It had just happened. They had just published the research a month before.
So the
Yeah.
research came through in your reading of
Yes,
him when
exactly.
he was asking about the surgery. Oh my goodness,
Isn't
that
that
is
great?
so funny.
It's so much fun and
That's
so interesting. I learned things about, healthcare and opportunities and options that I never ever, there's not enough time in life to learn
Mhm.
everything. That's one of the wonderful things about this process.
So it just like dropped that information in there for you.
I asked for it. I asked to see
Yes.
what could help, and it showed me. It's a very deliberate process. I call it ask and receive. You ask for information, it shows up. One of the things about intuition that people get wrong, in my
Hmm.
opinion, is they
Yeah.
think, they don't know how to work with it. It's like, well, sometimes I get an intuition and sometimes I don't. I'm like, well, guess what? You can cultivate this as a skill set so it comes on demand. That's what I teach, and that's how I work. And, you know,
Well,
yeah.
and this I think is so, so important, right? Because I think you've just explained sort of why intuition gets dismissed
Yep.
is because we don't understand. And sometimes it pops up and it's like, oh, thank you. Um, but it feels so mysterious and vague and aim and ethereal that it's like, well, it certainly couldn't be something that I just like rely on.
You want
And
to know?
you're saying that's
You
not true.
can. Yeah. Not only can you rely on it, well, here's how I describe it, and I'm going to
Okay.
segue into the research that I did to do the best I could to prove this. Um, where did I forgot my train of thought here? What did I just?
We were talking about how you can rely on it.
Yeah.
It's like you want to ask your intuition, you can ask it. It's not something you have to wait to pop up
Right.
when it's in the mood or
Exactly.
okay.
It's not like flashes of insight, which is what I call, these hits, so to speak, or
Hmm.
these downloads. You hear people talk about it a lot of different ways. Um, the way I describe the education that I teach is that you are going to be learning to work a new muscle,
Okay.
because it's not, intuition is natural, just like dancing is natural. You may want to like just get up and move your body, but if you want to learn to be a dancer, there's rigor and practice,
Hmm.
and then you learn skills. Well, intuition's the same way, honestly. And so if you want to learn my practice, there's a learning curve. That learning curve is working a new muscle. Some people say, oh gosh, this is like learning a new language. And I'm like, yeah, it takes practice, and you need a good teacher, and you
Yes.
need time. You need to take the time to get it done, because it's not, and if it was inherent, it's inherent to everybody, but we'd be living in a much different society if there was acceptance for intuitive ability. We're not. We're living in a very repressed society for this. And because of that, you don't learn it from the time you're a child unless you grew up in a very unusual household. So, getting back to the proof of intuition as repeatable, which is what science always wants, measurable and
Yeah.
repeatable. Can I talk about my research here? Do you mind if
Please
I might?
do. Yeah. Because I think that's what really sets you apart. And one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you is because you are able to translate what for many of us is this, mysterious woo into a very successful, published, peer-reviewed piece of research that has been picked up in many places. So please
Yeah.
tell us how you did that and what you found.
Well, where it began was me looking into the existing research on medical intuition specifically, not on psychic processes or quantum
Hmm.
theory or any of that. There's a lot of that too, but I wanted to see what the medical intuitives have done over the years. And there's very little research. And what research there is has been inconclusive, although very intriguing.
Okay.
And I knew, teaching this work for over 50, about 15 years here now, and being a medical intuitive for over 20 years, I knew that my students were getting hit after, it's like the clients were coming back going, yeah, you
Mm.
nailed this, you nailed this, you nailed that. It's like we
Right.
knew that already. And so I wanted to see if we could quantify that. And
Okay.
so what we did was I worked with some colleagues in San Diego at the UCS, University of California, San Diego.
Hmm.
And the study was five of the graduates of my graduates in my program, and we had 67 participants from the community, and some of them were patients from UCSD Medical, which was really fun. And the medical intuitives were blinded. We did not give them access to any of the patient's information, health information. They just did what we call cold readings. And the participants basically rated them in a survey. And we came out with Oh, and also we keep our eyes closed. That's another thing that's important in our work is that we don't want any input
Okay.
other than verbal. We'll ask, that we allow people to ask questions, but we don't want to see visually because that's one of those things. Oh, you saw that my blah blah was this way, and therefore, no, no, no. So we
Right.
did it as blinded as we could, literally. What we came out with was 94% accuracy in the medical intuitive's location and evaluation of the participant's primary health issue.
Wow.
94. That's the highest we've seen in any of the studies that have been done. We also, believe it or not, saw 100% accuracy, which is one of those numbers that, science is always scratching their head over. 100% accuracy in the secondary issue, uh, which doesn't surprise me because we do see these things.
Wow.
We also saw, there's a lot of data, but I'll pull out a few nuggets. About half of the participants had a known diagnosis. They knew they were working with something with their doctors. And the medical intuitives, they rated the medical intuitives as 94% consistent with their descriptions of their known diagnosis. They didn't diagnose, but what they
Right.
described was exactly right on with that diagnosis. So that particular piece of data got the
Wow.
attention of the
Yeah.
medical world. They're like, what are you doing over there? They don't even get 94%. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I was
Oh,
talking about earlier with
uh-huh.
the life history and all of that, 98% accuracy in describing life experiences that may have led to the health issues. The participants resonated and, they rated them very high for that. 98% is pretty outstanding. So
Yeah.
again, it's like when you look at the research that has gone down, one of the things that I think has hindered the process has been the medical intuitives not having a protocol or a process that is repeatable to this degree. And for that, I'm extremely grateful to the students and I'm grads and I'm proud of the program for that reason. And that's really what I set out to do is something that is repeatable, reliable. You can count on it and you can get good information.
Yeah. Well, that is really extraordinary. And congratulations and thank you um for building that
Yeah.
study and executing it. And I'm not surprised at those results, although I am surprised it's both
It's
because
so much fun to
understanding
see
how
it.
it works, that all the information's there. Of course, if you're trained to read it, you could see it. But also on
Yeah.
the other hand, like to have those numbers.
Well, you want
So
to prove it. You got to prove it to
yeah.
people. Otherwise, they don't take you seriously. That study was published in the Journal of Integrative and Complementary Medicine, which is a very respected integrative journal, medicine journal. And it really did make some waves. I think it was like a high impact study when it came out, meaning, tons of people looked at it and read it and
Right. It was downloaded and shared and
all that.
referenced all over the place, I bet.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to clarify, so you would have someone who had been thoroughly trained in medical intuition, um, go into, would they be in the presence of the patient or client?
The way we work, the way I teach is to be either on the phone, on Zoom. Most of these were done remotely in that regard, but
Okay.
with the participant on the phone or on Zoom, somewhere in person. It doesn't matter. It's a remote skill. It's based on quantum theory, quantum practice. It's non-local, put it that way. I like that word a
Yes.
lot.
Yeah.
So, and we don't actually need the patient or client there either. We can do this completely remotely, which is really fun for doctors to think about because a lot of them don't want to use it with their patient directly, but they want access to the information. So, with
Hmm.
permission from the patient, they can do this remotely as well. I mean, 100% remotely. So, there's a lot of applications for this in healthcare.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so so do a lot of people use this in conjunction, like they're a doctor or they're a nurse? I know you do a lot of work with nurses,
Yeah.
which I'm not surprised by. I hear a lot from nurses.
That's, you bet
they're
you
at
do.
they're at a very interesting place in the world right now,
Yeah.
seeing everything. But anyway, so that it would be something that they pull in order to make decisions, or it could be just like a standalone, like you go to see a medical intuitive and they give you their reading and that's the end.
It's
Could be
both.
either. It's
Yeah,
both.
I
Yeah.
work as a standalone. I don't work in a clinic environment at this point.
Hmm.
But I'm also don't have that background. I didn't come from healthcare to this. But all of my students come from healthcare. My program is open to anyone who is in health and wellness care. And we have some criteria there for qualification, but I teach loads of nurses, acupuncturists, massage therapists, certainly MDs, allied healthcare. That's my particular program because I made the decision some time ago that this is where it's needed.
Yeah.
Acupuncturists, chiropractors, all of that great stuff, health coaches. Um, and so I don't necessarily teach lay people. However, we do want people who are interested in this, who want to make it a career. We do, give, we consult on how to get from where you are to where you want to be, nutritionists. All of that is legitimate. And
Hmm.
so how people use it is within their fields. So I can't say use it this way, use it that way. I can say
Right.
here are the skill sets you're going to learn. You're going to come out of this with this ability, and how you apply it is going to be very exciting. So we have nurses working in the ICU. We have nurses working in the ER on the hospital floors at bedside, and they're using their skills. Now, can they use them openly? We don't know yet. We don't know yet, but
Right.
we're working on it. We're working on it. And actually, I've got something to tell you about that. There's some new research happening. We're just about to launch a new study on this. But
Oh,
let me
great.
let me back up a minute and
Okay.
say, either way, all of the practitioners that come through the program can use, and many do, most do, start another business of theirs as a
Hmm.
medical intuitive, and they adjunct it with whatever it is they do. For example,
Okay.
an acupuncturist might say, okay, let's have a medical intuitive session first. I'm going to get the lay of the land. I'm going to
Mm.
look at all this. I'm going to inform my practice this way. And then they put on the different hat. They're the acupuncturist, and they do their work based on what they discerned in the medical intuitive session. It is incredibly helpful for them.
Wow.
The psychologists, the mental health care folks who are able to do this
Hmm.
also have just the stories we're getting back are just phenomenal about how their patients are healing faster, are releasing things more readily. And I found that in my practice too early on, why I began doing this. Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
I'll,
We got
I'll,
all the time we want. This is great. You tell me.
I'll segue a little bit because this kind of
Yeah.
informs what we're talking about.
Hmm.
Well, I started out as an energy healer in this field,
Hmm.
20 something years ago.
Yep.
And I would do healing after healing. And sometimes, and then there's like energy and removing things and, what energy healers generally do. And I found that some of my clients, would just let things go. They'd have a great session, they'd leave later, and then they'd come back and the thing would be there again. Right.
Right.
And I'm like,
Yep.
okay, well, why is that? What's going
Yeah.
on? And I
Hmm.
noticed that I was able to see into the body. That was kind of a natural um, effect of being, kind of visual to start with. And I developed that myself over time and, whatnot. And I could see right into their bodies anyway. And I could see their life history. And I'm like, instead of just giving them this information in little spurts, as many healers do, like, well, I see
Hmm.
your mother, well, I
Yeah.
can't get really far into it because and I thought, what if I sit back and just look before I do any healing work? Could I get information? And
Mm.
I did that with the clients that agreed to that. And then I did my healing and I found that they were letting go of things energetically that were stuck for years, decades. And they would say, oh my gosh, that was so deep and so profound with the information, right? So what
Mm.
was happening, and I write about this in the book, is energetically, so to speak, their permission levels went up to heal. And so
Oh,
the imparting of information became that door opening for them to actually release things. So
right.
it's really fascinating. And
It,
it's not
yeah.
coming from their own mind or psyche or memories.
Mhm.
It's coming from the information that is stored within their energy systems. And some of it you would never remember, right? We have this
Mhm.
wonderful thing called denial, which frankly keeps us safe.
Yeah.
So we don't fritz out all the time.
Yeah.
but the energy doesn't have denial in it. It just looks, if you look for it and ask for it, it'll show up. So in any case, we're not here to trigger people. We're here to give them information that's
Yeah.
valid and relevant for them and see what happens. And in every case, it's like been woof, oh wow, I didn't remember. Oh, off it goes. So getting back to what I was talking about, if I can remember, um, the research that we're doing now is, oh, I know what I was going to say. The graduates of the program are reporting back all the time. And what we're
Mhm.
seeing is more and more of our medical intuitive grads are being hired as medical intuitives in clinical setting. This is the brass ring we've always wanted. And to see this happening is so gratifying. Well, they come into it with their certification, with 200 hours of training, with their own skill sets.
Mhm.
And the doctors and clinics and psychologists or whatever want them. And so this is
Wow.
very exciting. So
That
to that
is
end, yeah,
such good news.
isn't it? And this is why I wanted to say that first, because the next
Yeah.
batch of research, which I've just partnered with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, we've been working on this for a year, and it is a new study that will gauge the clinician's idea of the usefulness of medical intuition in the clinical process, which is something no one has ever studied. So, what we're going to have is a medical intuitive,
Hmm.
a doctor, a clinician, meaning someone who's a diagnostician, like a family medicine doctor, for example, or a
Yeah.
nurse practitioner, and their patients who have had issues that have not resolved or they can't get it, to a diagnosis about it or whatever. We're going to put the three of them together in a session and we're going to have the medical intuitives do their work and then they're going to have some private time alone with the doctors or the clinicians as well. But all three of them are going to be together and we're going to see what happens.
That is amazing.
Isn't that
Okay,
wild?
so the first study was sort of validating the accuracy of it,
Mhm.
and this is validating the efficacy of it
The efficacy,
for
the
the
usefulness. It's not
for the
necessarily about
practitioners working with the person.
exactly. So what we want to see, we decided not to do one of those gold standard RCT studies for this because we are not here to replace any gold standard medical procedure, right?
Right.
So
Yes.
it's like, why would we do that?
Yeah.
If you already have a test for it that's a gold standard, you don't need us, right? So
Right.
what do they need us for? Honestly, we talked about this for months about how to structure the study.
Hmm.
And this particular study was based on the only doctor I could find that actually works with a medical intuitive openly in her practice. And I interviewed her for the book. She's in New York. She works in a clinic. She has her own clinic in a hospital, believe it or not.
Oh,
And
wow.
she brings in she and her medical intuitive have been working together for over 10 years. And they do this. They have this little round robin with the patients that are agree to it, that want it.
Yes.
And the success they've had, I interviewed three of her patients as well, and they were over the moon with this. And we asked her, we want to use this protocol. She was like, go for it. And so that's because that's where we want to see medical intuitives.
Yes.
We want to see them working with doctors, working in the clinical environment, being part of the team, the healthcare team, because of the value that we know we bring. And I also want to say there are doctors who have brought at least one medical intuitive into the ER. There's an ER doctor in San Diego who works or has worked with a medical intuitive by her side. There are doctors themselves that are a medical intuitive that are starting to come out of the closet and say, I do this,
Right.
and work with their medical boards as best they can with it. So we're seeing a real shift here in the whole concept of whether or not intuition can be incorporated, and it can.
It can.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. And it lines up so beautifully with, I just did an interview that will have aired the week before this, um, about the ether and the structured water, as I was saying earlier, right? And there's all of this science that shows that what the medical intuitive is seeing is a real thing. It's just not visible to our accepted senses. It's this, we need, as I love that term, meta senses to see it.
Mhm.
And so it's all coming together and I think coalescing into this beautiful movement. It's so amazing. I love this work. Okay, this is super exciting. And I really appreciate you saying that about the doctors too, because it's very easy to get down on the poor doctors. And I've
Yeah.
developed so much compassion since
Oh,
I've
yeah.
started talking to them and interviewing them, as you were saying earlier. Like they don't want to shrug their shoulders and say, sorry, you're in this weird gray area where you're not sick enough for me to help you, but you're not well enough to have a nice life. Sorry.
Not only that, um, doctors are burning out, nurses are
Yeah.
burning out. The
Yeah.
system itself does not support the quote, the art of medicine. When I talk to doctors and I speak at healthcare conferences, as I mentioned, they all come up to me. The ones that come up to me afterwards go, "You're
Mhm.
talking about the art of medicine." I'm like, "Yeah, do they teach that in medical school?" Nope.
Nope. We've now got an algorithm. We outsource
Yeah,
that to the
that's right.
algorithm.
That's right. The algorithm is, wrong. I'll just say it right now. Look, it's
Yeah.
helpful. I'm not going to say it's wrong. It's a helpful tool. But when it
Mhm.
takes over the art, so to speak, the intuition of medicine, the the understanding of the patient, their life, their history, there's not enough time in the day for doctors in the system that we have. And they hate it. The ones that hate it really hate it. But let me also just
Yeah.
say that I
Mhm.
am not again, conventional medicine is life saving. Let's just say
Mhm.
that. You have an issue
Yes.
that conventional medicine does well, by all means, please. You have to.
Yeah.
If you don't, your body's not going to be happy. Bodies tell me all kinds of things. Bodies don't have a bias. If a
Right.
pharmaceutical does the job, the body's like, bring it on.
I love that is a really important point. Yeah, because
Yeah.
modern medicine has become really, really good at some
Oh
things.
my gosh. It's
Really good.
magic.
And so,
Life saving.
yes, there's certain surgeries, certain drugs. What I see happening though, and this we're talking, we talk a lot about dysregulated circadian rhythms and things, is like there's this um, explosion of chronic illness where people aren't sick enough to warrant the the miracles of modern medicine. They're just sort of living in this gray area where they're
Yeah.
not well, but they're not in crisis. So the
Yeah.
modern medicine can't help them, but there don't seem to be other answers. And so that's why getting this kind of information is
It's huge. And one of the
huge.
other things, it's about finding that path to wellness. One of the other things that we do as medical intuitives that I train people in is asking for information on where to find help. In other words,
Mhm.
I learned so much about all kinds of different sorts of healing methods just doing this work. And again, intuitively discerning and seeing and tapping into that. That's amazing. Listen, when you think about medical intuitives in healthcare, think about how that could expand healthcare just from that perspective alone.
Yeah.
What medical doctor knows enough about Chinese medicine, about Ayurvedic medicine, about naturopathic medicine, about energy medicine? Most do not, nor would
Yeah.
they. Luckily, we have these two new branches called integrative medicine and functional medicine in the United States. And by the way, there's other parts of the world that are already far more advanced in their own medical systems with homeopathy, herbal medicine, and things like that, parts of Europe and the rest of the world that already do this. They already integrate this. But here in the US, we're just getting started with that.
Yeah.
So integrative medicine is where that kind of, I would say, embraced me when they found out what I do.
Right.
And I teach a component about medical intuition for the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine. They're a really important organization in the US that has fellowship education for medical doctors and anyone else in healthcare to learn about these other forms of healthcare, not just typical Western medicine. So they have in their toolkit, an
Mhm.
understanding of how perhaps Chinese medicine might help their patient where conventional medicine doesn't have help. And as a medical intuitive, that's my job also, not to know things, but to have a line of communication with the quantum field to
Mhm.
receive what could help that person. Think about it. Not everybody's issue is going to resonate with Chinese medicine. Not everybody.
Yeah.
Not everybody's issue is
Mhm.
going to resonate with another form of complementary and integrative care. So to discern and prioritize is also part of the medical intuitive's job.
That is so fascinating. So you can ask the person's system,
What's going to help?
okay, so what would be the most helpful? And maybe it's hypnosis, maybe it's massage, maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a drug, like, but
Yeah,
you can ask directly and
yeah,
get towards a next step.
yeah.
Oh, this is so good. Because that's another thing that comes up too, right? Is like if someone's like, okay, I'm open to all the healing things, it's like, well, there's so many different paths to go down. How to,
That's the point.
and it's like what you're saying is like we have the intuitive capability to discern what would be the best next thing for us.
Well, you get clients who've done everything and or they think they've done everything and they feel
Yeah.
like they've done and they have done a lot and
Yeah.
nothing's helped. So what now what?
Right.
So you want to look at it from that perspective. I mean, we look at it from that perspective and also what could be the genesis of this that may not have been dealt with.
Right.
Right.
That getting down to that root cause.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one more area I want to discuss before we wrap up, and that's the idea of um, who who can become, who has the skill, the talent, the capacity, because that's another myth that we really believe about intuition is that you have to be,
Special.
born a psychic with psychic abilities or all those woo-woo words no one likes.
Yeah, it's
Um,
such a false notion. It makes me
is that
laugh. Listen, my husband said to me once, he doesn't have an intuitive bone in my body. He loves what I do. He supports it, obviously. And I said at one point some years ago, okay, honey, it's time for you to take the training, my program. And he said, okay. He's one of the best medical intuitives I've ever met. He's brilliant. And I
wow.
say to my, if you ask me this question, if I can teach my husband, who's a, very pragmatic fellow, I can teach anyone, and which means that anyone can learn it. It's a
Okay.
skill set. Now, I say that with a little bit of a caveat because not everybody wants to learn the specific technique that I teach. And
Mhm.
just to circle back to what we were talking about earlier, there are medical intuitives who use all kinds of intuitive senses. I
Right.
teach the visual sense. So it may
Okay.
not be a fit for everyone, but anyone can try and learn it. If you can see in your minds, if you can imagine something in your mind's eye, you have the ability to do this. You may not have the desire, but you certainly
Yeah.
have the ability. But the point about intuition on a broader scale is it is a false notion. It's hardwired and it's a part of human nature, you know,
Okay.
to get this
Yeah.
instinct, gut feelings, women's
Mhm.
intuition. I just knew it. I don't know how I knew it. We have a million ways to say this without understanding what it is we're talking about because it's been so stigmatized and so
Right.
poo-pooed. And there's a good reason for that, I want to say. There have been charlatans forever
Right.
who pretend and
Mhm.
manipulate people because it's easy. People are easily manipulated by someone, tapping into the mystical and telling them all these things. And it's a real problem in the field of intuition because who do plus ethics. Ethics are even more, that's what we're talking about is ethics.
Mhm.
If a intuitive practitioner isn't practicing with good ethics, there's massive problems here and leads the way to now, lawsuits and problems and everything.
Yep.
So we're at the point in history, in my opinion, that we need to understand the ethics of intuitive practices. And that includes energy
Yeah.
work or shamanism. Frankly, even, well, I know that acupuncturists get trained because they get licensed. There's no licensing for energy work at this point. Frankly, there's not even a national certification for it that makes any sense. So we're on our, we have to make sure that we have these skills and we understand the power differential between practitioner and client. We understand that we wield power. We have to use it wisely and understand what that is and not breach anyone's free will. We have to honor the free will of our clients. That's a bit of a missing piece here, which honestly is why we formed NOMI, and
Yes.
if anyone wants to go there, that's nomimedicalintuition.org, O-R-G, N-O-M-I, medicalintuition.org. And you can take a look at our materials there.
Okay. That's a Yeah, that's a very helpful resource. And it reminds me, I was trained as a coach, and it was, the International Coach Federation had a very
Yes,
similar
yes.
trajectory. They built all of their ethical principles. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that was sort of the core of the training. A lot of the coach certifications and training is just
Yeah.
understanding those boundaries.
You have to. Again, big missing. It's been the Wild West for decades, in the US.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
I'm very, very pleased to see that. I'm also a health coach and I got that training as well. So good.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So bottom line is, if a person is willing and they do the work, this is a capacity that can be developed in anybody.
absolutely.
All right.
Like I said, if I can train my husband, I can train any and skeptics. My husband wasn't
Hmm.
necessarily skeptical. He was skeptical of his ability to do it, but he wasn't
Hmm.
skeptical of the process. But
Right.
I've worked with and trained skeptics. People are like, I don't think I can, it's about doing the work. It's anything. Look,
Yeah.
here's an example. If you wanted to learn to play the violin and you picked up a violin, you wouldn't expect yourself to play Paganini's whatever, right? You wouldn't expect that. But
Hmm.
people have these weird expectations. Oh, I should just know how to do it. I'm like, why?
Yes.
It's like, do you have the skill or do you have the ability to play the violin? Everybody does, with whether or not they play it like, a genius or not, I don't know. Whether they want to play it like a genius is actually the question, because that
Right.
takes work.
Yes. Right.
And so does
And
this, right?
right. And I think that that's a really important, that's a great metaphor too, because it's just remembering, right? Like, intuition is a skill. We can
It's a
practice
skill.
it.
Yes.
Yes. And I love, and I think this is a great place to end. I love you have, in your book and on your website, this beautiful quiz
Yes.
that I think is just really great. So if anyone's listening and they're kind of like, I don't know, whatever, like, go take Wendie's quiz, because you, first of all, it will show you that where you are using intuition. I think just the questions that you ask, it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, okay, I am doing that, right? And then it shows how it can be developed just by
Yeah.
doing that fun little quiz. So I totally recommend that. Wendie, thank you so
Wonderful.
much for being here. I will put links to everything in the show notes. You have uh, trainings coming up, and then
Yeah.
as well the resource that you talked about with your organization,
Actually,
and
there's
anything else you want to mention.
Yeah, I'll do that now. Thank you. There is a program for everyone, not just for healthcare providers, that is coming out soon. I used to teach this on Zoom and in person, but we're transitioning to a self-study version of it. It's called Medical Intuition for Healing and Self-Care. It's a wonderful program, and it will guide people in not only how to understand their own intuition, but also how to use it specifically for themselves so that they can open that dialogue between their mind and their body and get information the way Medical Intuitive does for you. You can do this for yourself. So that program is coming out very soon. Go to the
Oh,
website.
wonderful.
Yeah, and
Okay, and
anyone can
that's
take it and it'll
the
develop
the
your,
practical path. Is that the
yeah,
website? Okay.
thepracticalpath.com.
Thepracticalpath.com. So there's uh, a training for everybody, a training for practitioners, and also the quiz is on there, which I think everyone should do. It's really fun.
And some good guided meditations too that help you learn how to work with your own energy, grounding, shielding, releasing, connecting with guidance, having that query with your body. That's on there too. And it's all free. Those are free.
Wonderful. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah.
And I know certainly, like, the more I learn about this and the more I learn, things from the quantum perspective, the more those kinds of practices, those kinds of guided meditations, I'm like, oh yeah, I really need to be doing that. It's really important.
They're very helpful for our own self care and also just for understanding that we're intuitive beings, that we have intuitive guidance, that we can tap into. It's a wonderful skill set to have just in life.
Yes, it's true. I've I've been slowly working on it, and everything has changed. So Wendie, thank you so much. Thank you for the work you do in the world. It's just truly phenomenal. I love it. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
being
Meredith.
here.
My pleasure.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who practices from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely take a look at the Applied Quantum Biology Certification, a 6-week study of the science of the new human health paradigm and its practical application with your patients and clients. We also love to feature graduates of the program on this very podcast. Until next time, the QBC.